I've noticed that you have talked a lot about quality of life and also about Singapore's rising unhappiness about foreign workers. So I would want to ask, do you think that Singaporeans are more materialistic now in a sense that I know many of us have our parents threatening if you don't study hard, you end up like the cleaners and stuff, and you wouldn't earn a lot of money. Or do you think that the Singaporeans are more concerned about quality of life, since there's also a lot of talk about the quality of life in Nordic countries and whether it applies to our society, as most of us, I think, might be more driven by money in this case?
You know, we work very hard. Most of us are very rich. I think, yes, so far, again, you know, it comes with the history of where we came from. I mean, in 1965, we were this little island with no resources. We were thrown out of a federation. We really didn't know whether we would survive. And so we really had to survive on the dint of our own hard work. And that very strong work ethic led to higher wages and led to us getting more materialistic things. I think I'm glad people are thinking more about quality of life these days, but if you ask me, and it's just a personal view, I still think Singaporeans would probably choose that Lamborghini over the joys of staying at home with your kids and just, making do in a four-room flat.
Okay, so do you think that societal attitudes have changed, because you're saying that Singaporeans in the past, we are really concentrated about making money and making ends meet, but now today we still want to increase our wealth and want the high value goods like Lamborghinis and branded goods as well?
That's true, and wanting to work hard is not a bad thing. I hesitate to say that we are a very materialistic society, materialism over everything else, largely because, we are also very expensive. I mean, the cost of living here is pretty high. So, you would want to work hard. And I'm also a bit wary of, stereotyping an entire nation. So there are people who do give up things. I think recently there was this wonderful interview published of someone who just stepped down as chief economist of GIC. So he was clearly earning a lot, but he cares a lot for the poor. He still lives in an HDB flat. He doesn't own a car, and from what I hear, he's spends time with his kids. He's interested in fishing. So he's Singaporean. So it's very hard to stereotype an entire nation. We each have our own dreams, and we each have our own trysts with destiny,
Okay, thank you.
Maybe if I can also just add to Brian's question. I think what Radha said about where we've come from. We've got rich so quickly that it's hard not to be materialistic, right? When the whole growth story has been on, if you work hard, you'll be rewarded for it, you'll make more money, you can buy your own house, and the house will increase in price, and you'll become wealthy, right? I mean, how many of your parents and their parents basically bought a house and are now sitting on a couple $1 million or more, right? Because of pure economic growth has increased our wealth so much. So, inevitably it makes us more materialistic. And I think what Brian said, our attitudes are changing, but it's a function of us becoming more developed as a country. But it's also a function of the fact that inequality has become, especially in the past decade, a lot more, stark than it has before. One conversation I had recently, which I thought was quite profound, is that this housing policy, right, that the government started in the 60s and 70s, of why build an HDB flat and why allow you to use your CPF to buy it, is because the government's original policy was really to have a policy of home ownership, right? That means every Singaporean who works hard and lives in Singapore deserves to be able to afford to have a home, a shelter over their heads. But because of this, what we call asset enhancement policy, where you buy your HDB flat and you expect it to increase in price, this person said was basically that our attitudes towards owning a home has changed, right? So we own a home not just to live in it, but to invest in it, so that we hope that 5-10 years down the road we can flip it for a couple $1 million or a couple $100,000 and make money from that. So, I mean, our attitude has changed, and partly it's because of how rich we have become, and also because of some policies. But I think it's good that we're having this conversation and that the attitudes are changing and that things are being done about it. I guess we have some questions. Yeah.
Testing. We have some questions from our online forum. Perhaps the first question. How important it is for people in Singapore to retain a sense of tradition in a modern day and age?
Where is this question coming from? This is a student here, is it?
Yeah, it's a student here from either from another LT who are not here, but they will see you live while you answer the question. They are peeking at you right from the camera there.
Okay. I guess this question is asking tradition. It means sort of preserving history, right? That Singapore modernizes so fast that in our desire to become like cosmopolitan and this shining light in Asia, that we've sort of our identity, right? Our history. I think it's an important question that we have to ask ourselves. If you look at, I think the conversations we had when the government wanted to tear down the National Library some years back, and then this debate that we've had and the angst that people have shown over Bukit Brown more recently. It's not just history and memories that people are worried about losing because we modernize so fast, but it's also sort of greenery, natural things, right? So people contrast like Gardens by the Bay, which is beautiful. They contrast it with Bukit Brown and the government's haste to tear that down. I mean, of course, I think it is important that we need to preserve it. We need to slow down the pace of growth. I think that's what Singaporeans want. They want more space. They want to have a better quality of life. So I'd say yes.
Yeah, I agree with Robin. It's important for us to develop a unique national identity. I think it stems from being rooted in history and traditions. And because we are morphing so fast, we're changing every day. Sometimes, old neighborhoods we grew up in might have been obliterated. And I'm glad there is a renewed sense of wanting to keep some of the old. And I hope this continues. Just want to share a brief anecdote. There's a professor who researches, he does archaeological digs, an NUS professor in Singapore, digging up, our past literally. And a few years ago when I visited one of his digs, I realized that all the volunteers were non-Singaporean. They were foreigners, and they cared more for the history of this country than Singaporeans. And the professor actually joked, saying, Singaporeans don't care about history, So, or tradition. So, yes, and even as a family traditions, intergenerational ties, those are very, very important, particularly given how fast we're aging. And, so you guys have a big role to play in that.
In Europe, there are many laws that are in favor of the single mother, but in Singapore, single mothers are often less recognized. So my question is, what do you think is the reason that causes difference? And are the laws in Singapore towards the single mother fair to the people?
Yes. Singapore right now, for instance, unwed mothers don't get baby bonuses. They don't have the right to rent an HDB flat and so forth. So there are certain policies. But when a few years ago, I had done a story on this, and I had spoken to someone very high up in the government, and the response then was that, the policies of a country reflect the society's wishes, choices, so forth. So if you look at Singapore society, the policymakers do believe that we are still a very conservative society. Second, they also, there is this fear that, if you suddenly give them single mothers a lot of benefits, there might be a lot of, there might be a surge in unwed pregnancies. Personally, I don't think that's going to be the case. Again, I'm not a policymaker, I'm not an expert, but personally, I do think that, especially in a country that needs babies so badly, there has to be more parity. Also Europe is an extreme example. I know there's some, in the UK, for instance, there's single mothers who, with 10 kids, last year I had read a story, and this was horrifying. She was actually living, she was Paul McCartney's neighbor because she demanded a big flat. And, so there are these extremes and very, very egregious examples of what's happened in the UK, but by just having a mere policy to provide parity to single mothers, personally I think that will not upset the balance in any way. One more reason, they justify this policy because they also believe that the family should consist of mother and father, and that's better for the child. So in order to prevent women from having children out of wedlock, they keep these policies. But at some level it hasn't worked, because many of the unwed mothers I've interviewed, for instance, claim they didn't know about these things, when they had children out of wedlock.